Carlos Montufar. Science and technology based on liberal arts, kindness, beauty, and truth.
Good morning to all of you. How have you been? After that wonderful conference that you just heard that moved all our hearts, right? Who didn't leave, touched in its soul after hearing Henry? There was a silence here in the auditorium, and I was asking myself, how can I talk and change the spirit of all of you and make them happy towards the future? And this wonder that we still have ahead. So I want to thank Julio for inviting me to this wonderful place, to this wonderful city that I have known since the 70s, and that each time more surprises me how beautiful it is. And as a person from the equator, as I told you, I've been here since the 70s, but I have a new plan. I'm going to be coming to talk with Oscar so they can take me to the restaurant of Julian to see this wonderful sculpture of Natalia, so I can afterwards go to the class of Jairo and then go to the Passerella and see to the gateway and see Maria Laura. That's my next plan, and I'm committed that you will be with me and help me with this. Who from here was born before 1950? Please raise your hand. I'm the only one. Wow. I'm always the only one. I'm always the first one in something, and I'm the first one that was born before 1950. And of course, these 70 years of life where I've had the privilege of living with the youth, well, brings me a lot of things to tell. I'm a passionate person for education, a passionate person for the youth, because I went into the classrooms in the year 55, and I haven't left them. There hasn't been 1 year in these almost 76, 75 years that I haven't been in a classroom. And this has brought me a privilege as a student, as an assistant, and as a professor. And it has given me the privilege of realizing the wonder of the youth. How many of you have been students of this university or other universities? Tell me more or less. You're in the process, right? The marvels of youth. People always tell me, Carlos, the youth is not like it was before. Before we were better. And I say, you know what? That's false. The youth nowadays is better than ever. It has some qualities where I always reflect over the past, and I realize that we didn't have those wonders that we had before. They are critics. They are entrepreneurs. They question themselves. They're far away from the memorism. And all of this is translated into what is education, and that's my passion. That's what I have worked for all my life. And I'm going to tell you my story of how I approached education. So just as they mentioned before, in the 60s, I was in the university in that revolutionary time, the Vietnam War, Woodstock, hippies, marijuana. And everything was done there for all of you youth people. Huh? You have to be thankful. We made the change for you. And of course the questions were the same. You liked it, right? Which part? Because we also made a freedom for sex. So it was a wonderful time, as wonderful as your time, right? We always moved from one side to another. And we had the same frustrations. We fell in love, we fought, we cried. That hasn't changed. But I did reflect and make questions. Who am I? Where am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going to? And that's in a great part of what Julio mentioned this morning, and those are the questions that many people have made themselves nowadays. I also reflected, how am I going to try to understand those four questions that have been within humanity, and that beauty or sorrow is that I have to tell the youth that there are no answers. And that's the beautiful thing of those questions, that there are no answers. Because if we had answers, we would lose all our struggles and all our beauty for the future. So part of the life is having questions that do not have answers. how I tried personally to try to understand this. Trying to understand that wonderful mechanism of the universe, as Pulaski says. Try to understand myself through this mechanism that I have heard nowadays. Evolution, adaptation, the origin of the universe, the cells, everything. Trying to understand those questions from that perspective, from a different perspective to the one that a philosopher can make. The ones that Descartes could make, the ones that Aristotle, Socrates made, all of them with the same questions. And I found through physics, let's be honest, first of all, who from here has lost their everything to be a physicist? Nobody, right? That's normal. That's the same thing I sell in the university. I will give you a full scholarship if you want to study physics, and no one. Hey, you do not know what you're losing yourselves. In reality, because you answer these questions, these interesting and fundamental and philosophical questions, and you lose the possibility of looking in a different way, analytical way, right? And we see nowadays that scientific paradigm that we have. And that's something that the youth cannot stop knowing. The world nowadays is more interrelated than ever. There are no isolated disciplines. You cannot be a physicist without knowing something of sociology. You cannot be a historian or know about history if you do not know about evolution. So we are so interdisciplinary that the methodology of teaching specific careers is completely obsolete. And the other topic is that everybody knows is, why are we educating for? And the first thing that the educators have to accept is that we do not have any idea. We do not have any absolute idea, but that's great. So let's make the best effort to give an education for the future. And all the universities, they say, the careers of the future or the next 10 years, we do not have any idea what they are for. What do we study for? And there, the question is, because we have fashions, right? We're going to do this, we're going to do this blue, green, red university to adapt to the future. However, the beauty of the future, right, as a physicist, is that it's completely unpredictable, right? And the ignorance of the future is what gives you a reason of being. It would be very boring to know the future, right? Who would like to know their own future? If you already know your future, well, that's already a past and you're death. So the future does not exist. The past, those are memories. And the present, does the present exist? That's something that I want to ask. That's always that I ask. That's what I ask my students of physics. Does the present exist? It already passed. It's the instant. And the instant has a longitude of temporality of 0 seconds. So the time is always a mystery. We never know. The past doesn't exist. The present is something that goes away fast, and the future is something that we ignore. And that's a question of the philosophers and the physicists, until a guy called Albert arrived. And this young Albert explained something about time and space, right? Something fantastic. I guess you have heard about that, of this Albert guy, right? Relativity. Gravitation. They just detected, and we have just seen the first black hole, and he predicted this in 1929. The first gravitational waves were detected. And we say we detected it, not the physicists, all humanity, because we work together. And that's why I love working in physics. Because there are no barriers, there are no languages, there are no religions. Everything is the same. We work between China, India, Japan, Quito, Medellin, without cultural barriers, without religious barriers, to try to understand this wonder of where we come from. And each time that we learn something new, we have more questions rising up. We go a step ahead, we have more ignorance. We give another step, we have more ignorance. And I always tell my students, and I'm sorry that I speak like in a disordered way, because that's how I am. I always say that what I can guarantee you, my dear student, is that after 4 years of paying a pension, of studying really hard, you're going to go out more ignorant than what you are today. That's the only guarantee I can give you. But if you do not leave being more ignorant, we have failed. And I hope you understand that concept of ignorance. And it's realizing that there is much more than this less information that we already know. So that's where we have the topic of education. Education has gone through a series of fashions at the level of schools, universities, etc. But I always make myself a question: what is the permanent thing of education? Which are those factors of education that haven't changed in time? Because we always want to change everything. We want to redesign the curriculum. The government, the wise governments, the ministries of education always comes. They say we have the magical formula, and this is the curriculum. But the education is so important that we must never leave it at the hands of the state. Do we agree on this, right? But you are in the hands of the state. We are in the hands of the state as well, due to bureaucrats that want to measure education. When the education can't be measured, it's intangible. How can you measure how much you learned of this psychological theory, or what do you know of the theorem of Pythagoras? It's a poem, not a theory, because it expresses a beauty of space. But they show it as a theorem. It's not measurable. And someone once said, and I believe it was, I'm sorry, my age is blocking a little bit of my memory. The German that I have inside, or the Italian that is inside, I don't know which one. I think it's the Italian, right? A frank deterioration of myself. Oh, Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde once said, what really is worthwhile to teach or to learn cannot be taught. So I think we're, deceiving some of you, because the only thing that we want to teach you, and what we want you to learn and take tests, it becomes boring, right? So let's go back to the question: what is permanent in education? And there's where we are referring to the different civilizations, from the Greeks, from the Romans, everything that we have been learning in education. And for me, it's summarized in 2 words: liberal arts. Does somebody here know what are liberal arts? Where do they come from? Well, they come in great part of the Romans, of the Greeks and the Romans, to form the free people in a society where we have free people and slaves. But then we created these liberal arts for those that are going to form free people. And it has 2 components: the tritium and the quadridium, right? What is a tritium of the liberal arts? Logic, dialects, and grammar. How many of those subjects are studied here in the colegiatura? None of them, you tell me. Julio? None of them, right? Okay. Yeah, I'm telling Juan what happened there. But what is this? And the truth is that it is being done here, and very well, because it's the art of communicating. Logic, dialects, and grammar, right? The rhetoric, being able to communicate. Why? Because the communication is the essence of education. It's not online, it's emotional. Communication. And the communication is the essence of the evolution of the human being. Human beings, right, is the species that has what we call that prolonged infancy. You are born, right? We are not born as a small cow that at just some hours they are just walking by themselves. Human beings cannot do that, right? Some people take 5 years. Some people like me can take 70 years to understand how to really walk and be free. So human beings are born prematurely. We are born prematurely, and which is the only way in which we can survive. It's with the communication between mother, father, and the baby. Breastfeeding, love, care. Those are liberal arts. Communication. And within communication, we develop within our species the language. The speech. All those species that did not develop that by evolution, well, they have disappeared. On many occasions, the concept of evolution is not very well understood. But those species that do not have those capacities disappear. So the language becomes amazingly important. And nowadays, communication is what you do. WhatsApp, chat, Facebook, all of these elements are communication. So the first permanent thing in education that all processes should have since the kindergarten until you have 90 years is to know how to communicate adequately. Because what I am saying, well, could not be the same thing as what you are listening. And I do not know or understand if I'm communicating in the right way. And the other barrier is the language. Is Spanish the best language to transfer information? Is it English? Is it Chinese, Mandarin? We never know. So all the educational processes must have a component of trivium that is rhetoric, dialect, and of course, speaking. And the second component, the quadridium. Astronomy, geometry, arithmetics, and music. All of you are taking those 4 subjects here, right? No, we do not want to take them. We have to discuss something there. Because you cannot be educated without the complement of art and sciences. There's no way to do it. And that is basically that capacity of quantifying. If within the process of observing, how do I observe adequately? How do I see adequately? Usually the educational processes in the schools are telling us what we are seeing, when the education is telling or leaving the student to interpret what they are seeing and communicate. That's the liberal arts, because it frees you. Because toward the end, education has one purpose. Julio gave us a very interesting list, but the thing that I most saw there is liberty. The educational process is liberty, with all the responsibilities that liberty brings, because it's not free. But that's what the education should generate, the individual liberty. It would seem a little bit selfish, but the education is a process between the altruism and selfishness. I cannot be educated if you do not want to take out the best grades. That's selfishness. And if you do not want to share everything that you're learning, that's altruism. So that's kind of a yin-yang, right? That's an essence of the San Francisco University. First semester, a course that is called self-knowledge, or the being. Self-knowledge, express, right, great, that's right. All the students go through that course. We do not like to mandate everyone, but they are mandatory. Where we reflect from the point of view and all the philosophies and all the lines of thoughts that humanity have had. You teach how to meditate. You teach everything. And you teach them how to discuss. And afterwards we teach them, I'm sorry, there's no way of telling how to teach. That word doesn't exist in education, but you try to incentivize. And afterwards you are exposed to the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy, and then they have to compare and discuss it, right? And that's a little bit the topic of this Congress, right? The other fundamental topic has to do with how do we bring enthusiasm to the youth over what Pronounsky says, over that majestic mechanism of the universe. That's what I am passionate about. For this, our students have to take another mandatory subject that I give that is called Cosmos. And the Cosmos is a Socratic seminary where we try to bring a contagion of this passion to try to understand the world. How does it work? What is evolution? What is the great explosion, the Big Bang? And where are we going towards? The great questions. Where am I? Who are we from the point of view of biology? Right? The origin of the universe. 13 million years of existence. And why does the human being appear in the cosmic calendar if the cosmic calendar up to the date has 12 months? And the human being would appear the 31st of December at 11:59 with 59 seconds. That's how small we are. We believe that we are the best thing, right? And what will happen on February of the next cosmic year? Well, probably we won't be here. And not because we will self-destruct ourselves, but because the fuel of the sun will be out. It will transform into a red giant. It will swallow the earth, and bye-bye. So that perspective of how small we are is very important to take it in account in our minds. But at the same time, the perspective of what we have achieved of being as a species. And in this, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Deepti. That's what Deepti mentioned. That crisis that we are living, right? I cannot in some way share this because I think that the humanity is living the best time of their history. Well, despite of this sad history as the ones that Henry have mentioned. But these are punctual elements. But never has the humanity been better. Perhaps you won't believe me, of course. But that's the idea that is being sold in the social networks. Everyone, right? The fatalists. The youth must have from the university a message of hope. That we are really doing better, and we're going to do better. We have never been better. I recommend you to read Steven Pinker. Has anybody read Steven Pinker, one of the psychologists of Harvard, one of the most important? That must be in the list of our libraries. There are several books that we must read, right? Ideas of Peter Watson, for example, right? You'll give me the list of books so I can take back to my university, right? Because this is not free, huh? This is giving and giving. But I am fascinated by that motivation, by that spirit that Julio has when we see his passion. Because if you do not have passion in what you do, well, it would be boring to be a professor. That's why I want to go to the classroom of Haida, right? To listen to that. Because if you are a professor, the best moment of the day is when you're in the classroom. That fright of getting that question to which you do not have an answer. What does the typical professor of public education? Silence. That's what you try to look for, to be questioned. That should be it. And questioning is very interesting because if you do not teach how to question, you cannot learn. And I believe it was Mark Twain who said
that the only time I interrupted my education was when I went to university. It's another one of our issues when we were stealing. And Albert said that education is what's left when you have forgotten everything you've learned. And so, really, I'm telling a story in which we say that university is useless. Because there is an Italian philosopher whose name I can't remember in some corner of mind. He said that it's time for universities to stop teaching so many practical things. And he speaks of the usefulness of that which is useless. And after you graduate from university, you realize that those disciplines that are apparently useless. Right. And I always have a professor in the back, like his tango classes, I always point at him. Or the class of that professor, or no, physics class is always useful. But the usefulness, but it's a 20-page book, really, the usefulness of the useless. And those are the true arts. When we went went to the University of San Francisco, we sold the idea of liberal arts, because in the U.S. we see art from elementary school. But we're three physicists practicing liberal arts, and we wanted to carry this model to Ecuador. And here's a parent who wants their child to study economics, and I'm going to tell you an anecdote later from the University of San Francisco. But basically, they said, I want them to see economy 1, 2, 3. Why do they have to take Eastern philosophy? Why do they have to see psychology, sociology, art, theater, music? It's difficult ideas to sell back then. Nowadays, every institution in Ecuador listens to us in our pensum. 35% of our subjects are useless, and so I fight for the useless. Physics is mandatory for everyone. I'm kidding. But my course, Cosmos, it's one of those mandatory electives that we have. So we ask ourselves, where is this educational process going? Since it's so fascinating. Speaking of economics and the state and the role of the state in education, it seems like the state thinks that the quality of education is proportional to the amount of hours in the seat, the amount of hours a student spends in the classroom taking notes, but I think it's inversely proportional. I had a professor of economics who he worked, I think, 7 years with me, but there was something missing. Since we have an international exchange program, I believe the largest in Latin America, and one of the universities that works with us, the University of Illinois, where I did my postdoc, we sent them to out their PhD. We have a university where we have at least 300 PhDs working in our classrooms full time. He goes, he finishes his 4 years, he negotiates with me, he returns to Quito and continues his career. Professor, complicated man. One day he disappears. He left his classes behind. He didn't tell his students. And in the next day's newspaper it says, and Minister of Finance of Ecuador, and I hadn't been told. I said, to do things right. 3 months later, he's fired from work. I find him walking around the university with his kids, and he says, no, I'm back. What do you mean? You left without telling us? No, have decency. No, it's my constitutional right to serve the country, and I'm here to return. We had a 1-hour discussion. We ended up relatively okay. We said that he would be a part-time professor, that he could dedicate his time to the activity that he enjoyed. 21st day, I receive a citation from the inspection of work, and he's suing me for firing him. I fired him. That man's name is Rafael Correa, president of Ecuador for the past 10 years. And he made our lives impossible because he didn't believe that education could be in private hands. 10 years. Going through issues of freedom of expression, corruption, which nowadays is being revealed in Ecuador. So many issues. Ecuador really was on a very bad path. And this was our ex-professor, and so everyone in Quito says, it's your fault because you fired him. If you hadn't fired him, he wouldn't be president. But we know that in this logic of predicting the future, that's impossible, right? There's no way to predict the future. Have you ever heard of Julius Verne? Do you read him here in the university? Spectacular. Why? Why did he have that capacity to write and to speak of the future? Because he was a man of liberal arts. He wasn't a scientist, but he understood liberal arts. And if we look, in essence, people of success, quote unquote, have had a youth of liberal arts. They've explored music. I have 10 minutes left, and I will conclude with something negative, something positive, and what we can do. Do you know how many people live in Latin America? How many cities? 7 billion, around 650 inhabitants in Latin America, from Mexico to the bottom, the Patagonia. By 2050, we'll reach about 800 million. Today, of the 650 million inhabitants, 250 are beneath the age of 24, and nearly 180 million beneath the age of 14. There are 180 million inhabitants in this sector. The proportion is similar in every country. In Colombia, how many million inhabitants? 50. There should be 20 million young people beneath the age of 14. And so look at what's coming. In 10 years, they will be older than you are now. As students, are we preparing them? Preparing them for the future in Latin America? And the sad answer is no. Henry has visited public schools, rural schools in our countries. And they have that memory, they don't go out and see. We have the most spectacular diversity on the planet. In Ecuador, Colombia, they are in rural schools, learning from books, by texts written by the state, the government of whatever moment. So there's an issue regarding what will happen within 20 years when you will have a very good education and the differences will be less and the percentages will be less. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but we have to work on this. Some more interesting information. Colonial times. Latin America. The first university, do you know where the first university in Latin America was? After the colegiatura? San Marcos in Lima. San Marcos in Lima. 1500 something. Quito had 3 universities. Mexico, Patagonia, there were 30 universities in Latin America. All of them to educate the clergy with the instructions from the Ministry of Education, which was the Spanish colony. And that was what we had in North America. 100 years later, we found the first university. 1600 something, the University of Harvard, right? And then other universities come about in North America, but for me, about 1700 something, there were more universities in North America than in Latin America. We see now which of the 30 in Latin America, how do we compare them with the 30 in North America? The 30 in North America, whatever the methodology of evaluating, they're always in the top 200. None of the Latin American ones are in those top 300. Many have disappeared. What happened? Because we are just as intelligent as the rest of the planet. We all came out of Africa how long ago? 130, 140,000 years. We move it back a little bit more every day. Homo sapiens sapiens. We take a character from 130,000 years ago, we put your clothes on them, and you can't tell the difference. So 130, 140,000 years, and we're all the same. We share the same genetic code, the same intelligence. What is happening? What is it? And let's go to Nobel Prizes in science. 600 Nobel Prizes in science since Mr. Nobel decided to give these awards. Something happened with a mathematician where we speak of why there are no Nobels in mathematics or biology, but that's not the issue. Of the 600, how many are from Latin America? It's one way to measure. I'm not saying it's an objective way, but it is a number. Of those 600, how many? 5 Latin America, 3 from Argentina, 2 Mexicans, chemistry and medicine. All of them in laboratories outside of Latin America. Harvard University, 30. The UK, so many. Stanford, so many. France, so many. China, none. Soviet Union, very few. The Soviet regime didn't allow creativity, liberty. And so what's happening? It's not that we have to copy them, but something isn't going right. And it's 2 things. We're not teaching liberal arts. We spend a lot of time instructing and not educating. There's a difference. It's easy to instruct. Educating is difficult. So there's a difference there. Patents. Latin America. Chile is the country that has the most patents in Latin America. 13 patents for every million inhabitants. The U.S. about 1,000 per year. We are in another park. We have to make a fundamental change. The truth is, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. But you, young people, should know. What will you do? Because here we see the future of my grandchildren, your grandchildren. We have to be a bit selfish. I have to think of my grandchildren. I have great-grandchildren, and I think Cairo understood women with his daughter. I have 5 granddaughters, and so I know what it is to be a woman and the concerns that they have. But what will we do? The answer is I don't know. And many times that's the best answer a professor can have is I don't know. And with this, I conclude that what we have to teach is this is a world in which information is abundant everywhere. Maybe I haven't paid much attention to this side, and you're going to think that I just want to be with Julio so that he sees me. But I lost what I was going to say. I said I don't know what we're going to do. Okay. To get away from an instructive method of teaching and speak of the multiple intelligence of Howard Gardner. He's the least friendly person, and the least friendly name I've ever heard. I forgot. We speak of critical thinking. We want to do critical thinking in order to promote creativity and entrepreneurship. No. The information is abundant. Information is not knowledge. From information to knowledge, we have a rigorous path to follow. And memorizing knowledge is not educating itself. And so we have to somehow promote critical skepticism. So we have to use a Cartesian method of skepticism, and we have to know how to be skeptical. And that's difficult. I'll conclude with a phrase which is also from Albert, which says, imagination is more important than knowledge. And that is what this university does. But imagination cannot be taught. Knowledge you can learn. And so, thank you very much. I didn't speak more of the university that we have, but it's been wonderful speaking to you. And if someone wants to study physics in the best physics faculty in Latin America, we do experiments in the CERN laboratory, speak to me.